Welcome to Jim Cantelon Today Television. This is Bible teaching for the 21st century. You're going to meet John the Baptist today, Jesus' cousin, who we know as the forerunner, if you will, of the Messiah. About 6 months older than Jesus. You remember the story of Mary and Elizabeth and then Caram? Mary coming to see her aunt as she left Nazareth for a period of time, and Elizabeth is pregnant and the baby leaps in her womb. You remember that story? John the Baptist. So we're going to take a look at him in just a moment. Don't go away.
Cantelon's Casual Commentary, a companion guide as you study the Gospel of Matthew, along with your host, Jim Cantelon. There is so much in Scripture that can't be covered in a half-hour program. What is the context for this story? What were the Jewish traditions at the time? What is the Hebrew meaning of the word? Jim decided to share some of his research with you in a series of compact booklets that soon will be a book. We'd like you to have a copy of Cantelon's Casual Commentary, edition number 1. Place your order with a meaningful gift and help us build this ministry. You may wish to become a monthly partner when you place your order. Phone 519-415-8341 or write Jim Cantelon Today, Post Office Box 989, Burlington, Ontario, L7R3Y7, or go to jimcantelontoday.com. Ask for Cantelon's Casual Commentary and state the amount of your gift.
Tremendous progress. We're in Matthew 11. Can you believe it? How long has it taken us to get here? I promised that from the get-go I was going to take as much time as we had to take to just walk you through and not rush you through the study of the book of Matthew. We did the same last year with the book of John, and as the Lord enables us, we'll do it again with Mark and Luke. So, first one of Matthew 11, it came to pass when Jesus finished commanding his 12 disciples, he departed from there to teach and to preach in their cities. And when John had heard in prison about the works of Christ, he sent 2 of his disciples and said to him, "Are you the coming one, or do we look for another?" Jesus answered and said to them, "Go and tell John the things which you hear and see. The blind see, the lame walk, the lepers are cleansed, the deaf hear, the dead are raised, the poor have the gospel preached to them. And blessed is he who is not offended because of me." I detect a little bit of tickedness here. I think Jesus is a touch ticked. Doesn't like being asked by the disciples of John whether or not he's the Messiah. Pardon me. John's in prison. Why? Because he suggested to King Herod Antipas that his marriage to Herodias, his brother's wife, was wrong, adulterous. And it was Herodias more than Herod who was offended. She puts pressure on him. He puts him in prison. And the prison would have been across the Jordan River in a place not too far from Jericho. And he hears in prison about Jesus. And you say, well, how he's in prison? Well, you can be sure John wasn't the only one there. There were other prisoners coming and going, family members coming to visit. And Jesus was the talk not only of the town, he was the talk of the whole region. And John would have heard more than once about his cousin Jesus. Why then is he so unsure? Are you the coming one, or do we look for another? Now, John had spent his young adulthood basically as a desert dweller. Kind of a strange character, wearing a garment made out of camel's hair, which in the heat of Israel would have been horribly uncomfortable, but this would be something consistent with many prophetic types over the centuries who afflicted their bodies with hair shirts. Eating locusts and wild honey, there's all kinds of debate as to what locusts mean. Real grasshoppers, or referring to carob beans, or who knows. Wild honey, well, honey's honey. You can find it to this day in some of the little caves and crannies of Israel. But he was just a wild man. And his whole raison d'etre was to stand on the shore of the Jordan River, just kind of southeast of Jericho, just before where the Jordan River enters into the Dead Sea, and he would baptize people. Baptize? Yeah, he was ritually cleansing people to prepare them for the coming cataclysm. The kingdom of heaven was at hand. And he believed that he had to purify city dwellers from the impurity of their city dwelling and prepare them as cleansed soldiers to join the army of the Lord, the army of the Messiah, who was at the door, who then would rout the Romans, drive the occupiers away from the Holy Land, and usher in the kingdom of heaven. That was his expectation. And it wasn't just John. I was going to say a stone's throw, it's more than a stone's throw, but you can almost see it from Qumran. There is the mountains rise up from the Dead Sea on the western side, and there is this settlement called Qumran, the ruins of which are there to this day. This is where the Dead Sea Scrolls were discovered back in 1948. You remember that? The greatest archaeological discovery of all time. The scrolls of the scriptures. There was a whole community there called the Essenes, or the Essenes, who were a hyper-holy, separate, living apart cult of, or sect of religious Jews who believed that even the air above the cities was evil. They came out of the cities to the cleanliness of the desert and established a commune there. And in this commune, they studied the scriptures, they copied the scriptures, they prayed, and they ritually cleansed themselves day in and day out so that they would become also mighty fighting soldiers in the army of the Lord. They believed there was not only a great battle coming with Rome, there was a battle coming with the very forces of hell itself, and the kingdom of heaven would descend, and the soldiers of the light would fight for the cause of the kingdom of heaven, and all evil would be banished, and the Messianic age would be ushered in. So, John wasn't alone, and there are some who suggest that John knew these guys, and they knew him, and he was influenced by them, and they were influenced by him. All speculation. We have nothing in history or in scripture to lend any support to that other than it makes a lot of sense. But here's John. He's in prison. He's hearing about Jesus. Yeah, he's healing people. And where's the big battle? No news yet of the throne being established in Jerusalem. Nothing about the Romans being routed. Maybe I was wrong. Maybe that voice I heard when I baptized him, "This is my beloved son in whom I'm well pleased," was some kind of a weird vision, but not the real deal. John had disciples, as you would expect. They were visiting him all the time, bringing him food and caring for his needs. In prison, one day he says to some of them, "Look, I want you to go and find my cousin and ask him, are you the one that we were expecting, or are we looking for someone else?" You see, they were expecting the kingdom now. Where was the axe at the root of the tree? Where was the consuming fire? As far as they were concerned, Jesus was acting in a very un-messianic manner. And so they were racked by doubt and fueled by impatience. So they come and they ask him the big question. Are you the coming one, or do we look for another? Coming one, capital C, capital O. Are you the Messiah? Are you the anointed one? Or did we make a big mistake? Are we looking for somebody else? I imagine Jesus saying what he says next through his teeth, or at least with pursed lips. Go and tell John the things which you hear and see. All right? The blind are seeing, the lame are walking, the lepers are being cleansed, the deaf are hearing, the dead are raised up, and the poor are being ministered to. All right? Now, it just so happens, you might not know this, I know this because I got to study these things. In the Jewish tradition, blind seeing, lame walking, lepers cleansed, deaf hearing, dead raised up, poor being ministered to, these were all markers of the ministry of the Anointed One, the Christ, the Messiah. Jesus says nothing about the throne being established in Jerusalem because he knows that's not going to happen. Not now. But in terms of the general space-time regional ministry that he was presently engaged in, and most of his ministry, by the way, was in the upper Galilee, or the Galilee region, from about Tiberias north, and then east into what was known as the province of Syria. In that area, blind people were being healed, lame people were being healed, lepers were being healed, deaf were being healed, dead were being raised up, and he always prioritized the poor. All markers of Messiah. And that's why I imagine Jesus saying it the way I said it, because of verse 8. Blessed is he who's not offended because of me. What, John? You actually dare to ask me this question? I've offended you? I've disappointed you? I've got it wrong? No, John, you've got it wrong. At this point, Jesus seems to draw away from openly announcing his messiahship. Blessed is he who takes no offense at me. Literally, anyone who's not scandalized or caused to stumble by me. I mean, Jesus is human, all right? You think, well, you know what? If even my own cousin can't accept who I am, then maybe I shouldn't talk about it at all. I mean, I don't see any reason why we can't infer those kinds of feelings. I think Jesus' feelings were hurt here. I really do. I mean, he and John had grown up together. But then, lest they think that he's dissing John, which he's not, he's just put out at John. He says, what did you go out in the wilderness to see? A reed shaken by the wind? What did you go out to see? A man clothed in soft garments? Indeed, those who wear soft clothing are in kings' houses. What did you go out to see? A prophet? Yes, I say to you, and more than a prophet. For this is he of whom it is written, behold, I send my messenger before your face, who will prepare your way before you. Assuredly, I say to you, among those born of women, there has not risen one greater than John the Baptist, but he who is least in the kingdom of heaven is greater than he. Jesus had a very high view of John. He says, what did you expect? You know, a reed that was blowing in the wind, a courtier, one of many prophets? He says, no, he's more than a prophet. Essentially, and he will say this in another place, he is the one. He is the messenger of the covenant. There was an expectation in the Old Testament that before Messiah came, that Elijah would come to announce the Messiah's advent. Basically, Jesus is saying he is Elijah. In fact, in Malachi 4 and 5 is a reference where where Elijah would return before the day of the Lord. And this is not a story of reincarnation. John is merely exercising Elijah's functions and fulfills the prophecy concerning him. John would lose his head, of course, not in any loss of control, but literally lose his head. Herodias, the wife of Herod, had her daughter dance for Herod and his invited guests. They were all drunk, and she dances in a way that pleases the men, and Herod makes a regrettable promise to her. And she responds by saying, well, what we really want is the head of John the Baptist. Herod kind of liked John. He was intrigued by him. He loved to spend time with him. What could he do? All these guys are there. He'd made the promise. Has him beheaded. He's not beheaded yet when Jesus says he who is least in the kingdom of heaven is greater than he. What he's telling us here is John represented the last of the old order of Old Testament prophets. You know, there'd been about a 400-year gap from the last of the Old Testament prophets to John the Baptist. Now the spirit of prophecy, if you will, has returned in John the Baptist. In that sense, he is the Elijah who was to return. And the disciples, who have just gained an entry-level status in the kingdom of heaven by their association with Jesus, they're of the new order, but the new order has eclipsed the old. And what Jesus is suggesting here is that John's ministry in the desert till the present has been more of the old order, even as it is bridging the new. So in one sense, he represents the past. In another sense, he is introducing, or forerunning, if you will, the new. So even though the new order is in its infancy, already from John's ministry in the desert till the present, zealots have seized on John's and Jesus' ministry as means to a violent overthrow of the Roman occupation, the establishment of a Jewish throne in Jerusalem. In fact, Jesus had in his own cabinet, if you will, one of those zealots, Judas Iscariot. But this is not the kingdom of heaven as Jesus understood it. That's how John understood it. That's how he saw it. That's how Judas understood it. That's how he saw it. In fact, there are those who suggest, and I think there's something to it, that when Judas did his vile deed at the end of Jesus' ministry and betrayed Jesus, he was hoping to force Jesus' hand, force him to reveal himself as the king of Israel and the redeemer of the nation, the one who would rout the Romans and establish the kingdom of heaven on earth. He basically thought Jesus needed just a little bit of a push. That's just a speculation, but I think it bears some consideration. So, even while he's a little bit put out at what John says, and what he asks, at the same time he says, this is a great man. But you know, the new order is eclipsing the greatness of the old. And even my novitiates here, my newly called disciples, are greater in the kingdom of heaven than that of the old order. And of course, this was just the beginning of something which you and I share even to this day.
The work of the Word of God is stunningly remarkable. We must understand that God has placed His life codes of salvation and healing in the books of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Jim Cantelon is focused on the messages that God has communicated through the Bible to you and me. Today, it's more important for us now that we learn what God is saying to us. God has placed us here now to be examples and to share the good news of His work with the world today. If you've heard the Divine Mind speak to you through this program, then God has worked in amazing ways to reveal His Word. Remember that this program has cost, and we have been faithful to God to bring this program to you. If you want to give an offering in any amount, we would appreciate it. Send to Jim Cantelon today, P.O. Box 989, Burlington, Ontario, L7R 3Y7. Or call us at 519-415-8341. Or simply visit jimcantelontoday.com.
You know, I commented a moment ago on, I didn't read it, but I commented, from the days of John the Baptist till now, the kingdom of heaven suffers violence. The violent take it by force. They're talking about the zealots, about Judas being a zealot, trying to force Jesus' hand. You can be sure there were those who tried to force John's hand too. They would take hold of these charismatic figures and try to use them to their political advantage in terms of establishing a Jewish throne in Jerusalem. And so I won't comment on that further, except to say this. When he says, from the days of John the Baptist until now, the kingdom of heaven suffers violence, the violent take it by force, he's basically talking about human efforts to establish the kingdom of heaven. You know, it's not something that is peculiar only to Jesus' time. There are all kinds of people to this day who are trying to force, if you will, the kingdom of heaven into being, relative to politics, relative to social and cultural values, trying to force feed or even push, you know, what they see as kingdom principles into the mouth of a nation or a culture or a family or even an individual, forcing it in. Well, I think Jesus is making the point, you do not force feed the kingdom of heaven. There are many who've tried it, many who will try it. Judas tried it. A lot of the zealots of John and Jesus' time tried it, trying to influence them to, you know, ride on the back of their popularity and their charismatic and miraculous giftings and awe the people. In fact, the very thing that Satan was tempting Jesus to do. You know, go to the pinnacle of the temple, hurry yourself off, fall down 400 feet. Angels will soften your landing. The whole city, the whole nation will be so impressed, they'll all follow you. You'll be able to rule the kingdoms of the world. Unfortunately, some church committees think that they can, through the dexterity of their strategic plan, they never use the word force, but in fact, that's what they're trying to do. They're going to force their people or their community into thinking better of them and thinking better of Jesus. Doesn't work that way. Okay, let's move on. To what shall I liken this generation? It's like children sitting in the marketplaces, calling to their companions and saying, we played the flute for you and you did not dance. We mourned to you and you did not lament. For John came neither eating nor drinking, and they say he's a demon. The Son of Man came eating and drinking. They say, look, a glutton and a winebibber, a friend of tax collectors and sinners. But wisdom is justified by her children. What Jesus is talking about here is a common game that children used to play in his day. It was called weddings and funerals. Now, I've never played this, but then ours is not a Palestinian or Middle Eastern culture, is it? In the weddings game, the kids would sing and dance. In the funerals game, they would wail and mourn. They would pretend that they were adults, and they would, you know, both weddings and funerals had all kinds of emotion, weeping, wailing, rejoicing, ululating, you know, lots of noise, trumpets blaring, you know, and so the kids would try to emulate all of this. But Jesus is personalizing it. Wedding game, singing and dancing, that's about me, Jesus. Funerals, wailing and mourning, that's about John. In my case, I came eating and drinking, and they say, look, a glutton and a winebibber. In John's case, he came neither eating nor drinking, and they say he's a demon. Either way, we lose. We offend everybody, at least everyone of the religious culture. The Pharisees, the Sadducees, the scribes, who were the religious lawyers. Everybody's offended at us. Offended at John, offended at me. Offended at John because he lives this ascetic lifestyle. Offended at me because I've got all of these wine-bibbing friends. Look, he says, the proof of the pudding is in the eating. Jesus' works proved he was no glutton or drunkard. Wisdom is justified by her children. In other words, You want to know who's the wise one? Take a look at the fruit of their life. In another place, he'll say about all of us, you'll be known by your fruit. You say you're a follower of Jesus. We're not interested in your categorical catechism, as much as it may be important to you. We're not interested in your verbal profession. What we're interested in is how you live. The fruit of your life. What is it your life is producing? That will speak to us much more loudly than words. What was it Francis of Assisi? At all times preach, and when necessary use words? When you think about it that way, you realize the wisdom of Jesus' words here. By your fruit you'll be known. Wisdom is justified by her children. Whatever the product of your life is, will be that which tells your friends and neighbors, your world, who you really are.
Remote and rural, these children and their families have no access to medical care. There is no clinic nearby. And when a mother is desperate to save her dying child, she will walk for many hours. Sometimes the child doesn't survive. So we go to them. These tables and chairs under the trees look like a gathering, not a medical clinic. But the doctors and nurses are transforming the lives of the children and their families. They provide primary medical care, classes on sanitation, medicines, and a better understanding of HIV and AIDS. Most of all, they bring hope as they diagnose, treat, and educate families. This clinic is a gift from donors that will transform their lives. You can become part of that transformation. Your gift of $25 will provide health care for an entire family. $100 provides care for 6 families. Be a part of real change. Go to wowmission.ca/saveachild.
When John said, are you the one who is to come? What he was saying, as I pointed out, was, are you the Messiah? Are you the anointed one? Are you the Christ? That's what Christ means, by the way. Jesus Christ. Yeshua HaMashiach. Jesus, the anointed one. Which tells us that there's something supernatural about Jesus. And when his spirit and his presence comes into your life, you experience the anointing of his presence. It makes all the difference in the world. Think about that one. See you again next time.
Contact us. Jim Cantelon Today, P.O. Box 989, Burlington, Ontario, L7R 3Y7. If you're sending a check, make it payable to Jim Cantelon Today. Or visit us online at jimcantelontoday.com and click Support.